All right, guys, welcome back. We have a couple of things to talk about today. I do have a few things that I found in my notes that I forgot to talk about in the original analysis video. You know, I just start going through my notes and then go, damn, I forgot to talk about that. Just small things, just details. But the main thing, of course, that I want to talk about is the return the special that they did, because obviously I didn't get to talk about that at all yesterday. And it's a pretty big deal, guys. It is. But I also want to talk about some of the weirdness around it. Okay. So for anybody who watched it, or maybe I should say for anyone who didn't, it was pretty much just Norman and Melissa walking around Georgia where the sets from the regular flagship show used to be, and reminiscing about working on the flagship show. And they talked a lot about scenes they had together and their characters' arcs and things. I actually thought it was really fun to watch. It was fun to revisit a lot of it. They showed scenes from like season 2 and season 3 and talked about most of the Red Letter events, like especially between the two of them, those two characters. But then, of course, they hit on a lot of the major narratives. They talked about like when Rick left, and they talked about Negan, and they talked about the Whispers, you know, so they kind of just went chronologically through the show. The big deal was that Norman actually talked a lot about Beth, and that was really fun. However, what he said didn't make a whole lot of sense from a logical standpoint, but he has said it before, so that's kind of what I want to delve into. So they started talking about him and Beth leaving together in season 4 after the prison went down, and the first thing I noticed is that he said Beth and Daryl had a little side mission. He called it a mission. And they have, I don't even know when or who exactly, but I know that I've heard that before. So probably he or one of the writers have called it that before. But it's a little bit odd to me that they call it a mission. It's just kind of a strange word to use because they weren't on a particular mission. That makes it sound like they were on a Black Ops mission, or like they were specifically trying to accomplish something. And at least when they left at the prison, that was not the case. They were just like everyone else. They were just running for their lives, trying to get out of there and trying to stay alive, not get bitten by a walker and everything, you know? So it's just kind of an odd way to say it. And because they've said it more than once, I think that this is probably something they've been told to say, is to use that word. And I don't know what the logic behind that is, other than they just came up with that as a way to talk about it, you know, without giving away too much. It's also maybe a little bit of misdirection going on there, but beyond that, I'm not sure. I don't have a specific theory about why they call it a mission, but it is kind of strange. And then when it comes to the romance, he did talk about Beth and Daryl, and this is significant for a lot of reasons. First of all, we 1000% now have confirmation about the romance being there. And, you know, we've had it before. We just not in as big a way as we could prove, right? So I've even recently talked about like the synopsis that went up on the AMC website, and then they hurried and took it down. Well, that was confirmation enough because it was the powers that be that put that up there. But because they took it down, we don't have it anymore, right? So people can ignore it or pretend that didn't happen, and we know there are certain shippers that are very good at ignoring the reality of it. So we just didn't have it. And the reason that there are a lot of people online flipping out about this is because they can't deny it now. He's 100% talking about that there was romance there, you know? So that was really, really fun that they allowed him to talk about that, and then he talked about it a lot. But it was a little bit contrived, the things that he actually said. So I'm completely paraphrasing here, but basically what he said was that Beth said something that made Daryl think she was coming on to him and that she was romantically interested in him. And that freaked him out. Not because he didn't like her or did like her, just because it was Daryl and he was awkward and he didn't know what to do, right? He just got really nervous. And then he kind of played it off as when she said, oh, especially because she like kind of stopped smiling when she said that, he thought he had misread her and went, oh, okay, well, maybe she's not interested after all. And that was actually a relief for him. Again, not because he did or didn't feel anything for her, but because he just was awkward and didn't know what to do. Now, there was another special, I want to say it was called the Origin Special, and it was a couple of years ago. I don't remember exactly how long ago it was, where Norman said something really, really similar. I don't think he talked about it quite as much in that special. This was a lot more that he talked about and gave details, but he said something really similar that he thought he had, or Daryl thought he had misread her. So the reason that I say this is a little contrived is it's kind of the opposite of what we actually saw in that scene in Alone. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think a lot of the things that happened when Beth and Daryl were together would have definitely made him think that maybe she was interested, like when she took his hand in the cemetery, things like that. But he was talking specifically about the scene in Alone, the dinner scene. And in that scene, she really didn't say anything like that. And it was Daryl, if anything, that when she said, what changed your mind? And he stared at her, was letting her know that he was interested. That's the way that we've all, I think, always seen it. So he's kind of telling us the opposite thing. And that's a little bit strange. The fact that he said the thing about Daryl thinking that he had misread her more than once, that Norman has said that, makes me think that that's their way of telling us what was going through Daryl's head. So I think that's probably true, which is kind of sad that he, right there in that moment thought maybe she actually wasn't interested. But I'm sure, I can't help but think the reason they keep telling us that is because it's going to come up at some point in the show. So maybe at some point Beth and Daryl will actually have a conversation about it, and she'll be like, no, you were misreading me. That's not what I meant at all. I was just surprised, and that would be a fun conversation to have. Anyway, but beyond that, it's a little bit strange that he's telling it differently. And I listened to it a couple of times and I was like, why is he doing that? And I have some ideas. I mean, we don't really know for sure. It's all conjecture, but I have some ideas about why they are maybe having him speak about it that way. And so I'll get to that in just a minute. But the biggest thing is that, you guys, they are talking about her, and we have her name, we know, is going to be in the final episode of season 2. And the other thing I want you to notice about the special is that they almost spent more time on her than any other character, other than Daryl and Carol, of course. They mentioned other characters in passing. They mentioned, like I said, they mentioned Negan, they mentioned Rick, but they were always mentioning them in like the intersection of those other characters with Daryl or Carol's arc. So it wasn't like some big conversation about what happened when Rick left. It was more like, how was it shooting that scene, and what did Daryl feel like after Rick left, and what was that about? You know what I mean? So it was like from Daryl's point of view, because that was something that affected Daryl in a big way. Okay, but beyond that, they didn't really go into other characters very much. They focused more on the big arcs, again, like Negan, like All Out War, like the Whisperers, like the Commonwealth that was affecting everyone, on the entire show. But then they just took this little foray, and it was like 5 minutes long, where they talked about him and Beth for a minute. So that's important. They obviously wanted to throw that in there, and it's just another way of saying, guys, they're getting us ready for her to show up. Okay, they have to be. There's no reason that they would be doing this, and now, especially, you have to say, why now? If it really was just them talking about her in passing, why didn't they do this 5 years ago, right? Or why not do it later? There's some reason they're doing it right now. Anyway. When I was watching it, excuse me, I was waiting to see what they said about Grady, right? Because they did talk about season 4 and, that whole thing, which I'll return to in a minute. And I was like literally messaging with my fellow theorists, and I was like, okay, I'm going to wait and see if they say anything about Grady, and I'll let you know. And guys, if you watched it, they skipped completely over Grady. I mean, according to them, the show went from Terminus to Alexandria in the blink of an eye. Nothing happened in between. Okay? They completely skipped over it. It's another thing that's super suspicious. Not only because, like, for obvious reasons, why didn't they talk about that, right? But again, it comes back to what they're actually saying about Beth. And it's just, obviously it would be suspicious to us either way, but they're just handing this to us on a silver platter, guys, because go back to what I was saying about the mission thing. If they're calling that a side mission that Beth and Daryl were on in season 4, what was Grady then? Chopped liver, or is that part of the same mission? That's what I want to know. And that's what I mean. The fact that they're calling it a mission, it almost feels like code language for that's a really important arc, and they didn't say that about Grady. Don't get me wrong. They didn't mention Grady at all. But the fact that they said it about Beth and Daryl when they were together on their own in season 4. It's like, why are you calling that a mission? Is that linked to some other quote-unquote mission that Gimple has that he's going to bring back around, and you're hinting at that or something? You know what I mean? It's just like totally got my mind spinning about obsessing about this word they're using, and it's probably not even that important. But they completely skipped over Grady, and I just feel like, okay, well, if this was a side mission they were on, and if it really was, again, hypothetically, playing devil's advocate, if it really was just that Daryl was kind of awkward here, then why wouldn't they say anything about Grady? I mean, they're going through all these arcs, and all the people Daryl lost, they mentioned Merle, they mentioned Rick, you know what I mean? They're mentioning all these things, and even most of the general audience who isn't, shipping Beth and Daryl and doesn't think that she's going to return, most of them even will name the end of Coda, where he carries her out of the hospital, as the most tragic and iconic moment of the entire series. Why wouldn't they go over that? You know what I mean? You can understand why they might skip it for other characters. They might not go over it when we're talking about Rick or like Michonne or even Carol. But Daryl, I mean, he was carrying her. It's like the most iconic and tragic moment of the entire series, specifically for him, that revolved around him. There is no reason that they shouldn't have at least addressed it. But they skipped over it. Super, super suspicious, okay? And it kind of made me happy, because the more suspicious they are, the happier I am. It just shows that, like I said, they're giving it to us on the silver platter. They're getting ready for things, right? Okay, so let's talk about why they might have had him talk about it the way that he did, because he was very silly about it. He was very goofy about it, and the only thing that he kept saying is that Daryl was awkward. Like that's all that they were talking about. He didn't know what to do. He was super awkward. It was super funny. Ha ha ha. And that's just the way that they were talking about it. So why would they do that? Well, again, we don't know for sure, but I kind of was thinking about it a lot yesterday and trying to come up with some ideas. And the most obvious one, I suppose, is that it's just misdirection. I mean, I do think that on the one hand, they are looking for excuses to mention her, because they're, like I said, trying to get the GA, the general audience, prepared for her to show up, okay? So it's an excuse to mention her, but they're also not going to go into the deep emotional parts of it. They're just going to talk about it in this goofy, passing, sort of silly way, so that they are kind of hitting a lot of birds with the same stone, right? They're mentioning her, they're reminding us what happened, they're kind of getting us on board with it, and at the same time, it's very lighthearted, and they're not, if they suddenly stopped and he stared at the camera and, talked about how Daryl was in love with Beth and lost her. I mean, clearly they're not going to do that. That would be really obvious. You see what I mean? So they're just trying to, yes, mention her, but also just kind of be, just in passing, and it's not that big a deal, but, we all know that it is. And like I said, I just feel like that the fact that they did that and they're trying to say it was not a big deal, then why wouldn't they mention Grady? It just makes it all that more suspicious, right? Another thing I thought of, which is maybe I'm reaching here, and this is just, me having a little bit of a headcanon for Team Delusional, is that more than one person over the last couple of years has asked me about whether Beth had feelings for Daryl. Because what people do, again, everybody is interpreting that scene as he was letting her know that he was interested, and then she said, oh. And there were a lot of people who wondered if maybe she really didn't have feelings for him, especially because I know that at least in German, the subtitles, they actually said no, like N-O, instead of O-O-H, and that made people think she wasn't interested. And that's actually just a mistranslation. That's not what she said, right? So there's been a lot of worry about that. And so I've answered more than one ask in my inbox about that. And I just, talk about the fact that she talked to Carol about him. And we've always said that was her kind of crushing on him. The fact that when they were fighting in Still, she mentioned how he was when Sophia came out of the barn. So it's obvious that she was watching him and was very aware of him, things like that. And so we have evidence that she was interested, and she, at the very least, I always say that she looked up to him and maybe she was kind of crushing on him, but she didn't really ever think that he would return it. So it's not like she was thinking they would get together, but she very much admired him, and, anyway, so we do have that evidence, but the point is I've been asked that more than once, and so I almost wonder if them talking about it this way is their way of answering that question. So, I mean, think about what he said. He didn't say Daryl let Beth know that he was interested. He said that Beth did stuff that let Daryl know she was interested. And I wonder if that's almost like a roundabout way of answering this question about how Beth felt up till then. I don't know. Like I said, maybe that's reaching, but I just was thinking about that and the fact that I've answered that more than once. And it's just odd that they're that they're phrasing it this way. They're like reorganizing the whole narrative of what happened in that scene, but there's a reason for it. If they're doing that, they're trying to convey some information to us. And another thing I thought of is that they are sort of using it to downplay Grady, which is interesting. And I've kind of covered this, but just to go into it in a little more detail, by not only skipping over Grady, but by making this interaction seem kind of goofy and like it was way in the past and Daryl was just awkward and didn't know what to do. I mean, they're bypassing the fact that Grady was important at all. And I mean, even outside of Beth and Daryl, like that Grady might have been connected to anything bigger in the TWD universe. You see what I mean? It kind of minimizes it. So they're like almost trying to get our attention away from that, I think, by just focusing it on something that they can say was funny about that in season 4 about Beth and Daryl. You know what I mean? So anyway, I think those are the main things I came up with. But it's just, it's fabulous that they talked about it and this keeps happening, right? I mean, it's not like this has just happened once. We've got her name. We've got all this stuff going on. We have, the other thing I was going to say is, and I didn't even think of it actually until my fellow theorists were watching it and they were going, okay, we're watching it, but you've already seen it. Do they talk about Leah or Connie? And I didn't even think about Leah or Connie while I was watching it. No, they skipped over that entirely too. And, why is that important? Well, I mean, I could probably deep dive into that and do entire videos on each one, which I will not do because I'm already running long here. But, I mean, clearly they're not seeing Connie as important enough to mention here, which just tells me that she's not going to be part of the narrative, at least not right now, moving forward. Because I almost think, you guys, you need to see this almost like, you know how before an episode they will show a recap and the things that they recap are directly related to what we're going to see in this episode? So they're not going to recap something from last season that has nothing to do with what's going on in this episode. They specifically recap what's relevant. You got to see the promotions this way, right? Everything they talked about in this episode is going to be, not in this episode, in this, the return, the special, is going to be relevant moving forward. So that's why a lot of it was Daryl and Carol, because it's about their relationship. It's going to be about Carol's demons. They're going to do a lot with Sophia, right? So we already know all of that. So it makes sense that was in there. The fact that they mentioned Rick, I don't think Rick is going to show up in season 2 or anything like that, but assuming that Carol didn't leave until Rick and Michonne returned, she's going to tell Daryl about Rick. I'm just assuming that that's the case. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. We'll have to wait and see. But if that's the case, that's probably why they mentioned Rick and said, what was it like for Daryl when Rick left? Because that's going to be relevant, even if it's just for a few minutes while she tells him and he reacts and then that's it, So with that in mind, they're mentioning Beth, I'm just saying. But, I mean, the fact that they didn't mention Connie, it doesn't mean that she wasn't important to Daryl. It just means that she's not going to be relevant to the story moving forward. Now, you could say the same thing about Leah, but the other thing about Leah is that there's a lot of weirdness and still mysteriousness around the whole Leah storyline right now. And so I think part of the reason they're avoiding it is because they don't want to tell us anything about it, so they're just avoiding it. Kind of like Grady, kind of the same thing. They don't want to tell us about it. They don't want to hint at anything, so they're just not mentioning it. But again, I also don't think Leah's really going to be relevant moving forward either. So anyway, I will leave it at that. I really loved watching it, and I kind of want to watch it again and, take better notes and listen more carefully to what they're saying. But it really was a fun special, and it's a big deal, guys, that they're talking about Beth that way, and that they have officially then, if they already had, but nobody can gainsay it now. They have officially confirmed the romance, and they went out of their way a lot, as they have been doing, to confirm that Daryl and Carol are not romantic about things, right? And, like they talked about the Pookie thing, which was something that they had posted before the special, on its own. But everything that they're doing in this special, they're doing on purpose because it's going to inform the relationships moving forward. So that's just something to keep in mind. That's all. I said I was going to talk about the extras, but I think I'm going to do that tomorrow. Like I said, it's just small things, details that I forgot to talk about yesterday. And also the scene with the Daryl and Isabel kiss, as well as the scene where Daryl and Carol reunite, have been leaked. So I will talk about them a little bit tomorrow too. I'm really not overly concerned about either one. I've watched both of them. I actually thought the Daryl and Carol reunion was really sweet. So it's not unlike Terminus. Anyway, I'll be back tomorrow to talk about those things and the extras I didn't get to today. I hope everybody liked the first episode and liked the special. And yeah, if you're jumping up and down, you absolutely should be. Like, she's on her way. And that's what I wanted to say too. Everyone's concerned because we haven't seen any of the reviewers talk about her. So I really hope we see her in season 2. If not, I'm really not jumping off the Team Delusional train because it's just, there's too much pointing to her being here. But I hope we do see her, and I hope it's just in a coda or something like that, or I don't know, they announce it or she shows up at the end or something. I don't know. But either way, like, guys, there's no way this isn't happening at this point. So don't worry about it. You know, I mean, yeah, it's going to suck if we don't see her and we have to wait longer, but she's still coming. So anyway, that's all I had for today, and I will be back tomorrow.